Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Vintage Books Live. Tonight we are excited. We have two authors with us. We have Maya Prasad and Susan Azim Boyer, and they both write YA. So I'm super excited to have them. And I'm going to start off with our usual question. Maya, I'll ask you first. Can you tell us the story of how this book that you have in your background came to be?
Yeah, so I've been writing for a long time. I've been writing a bunch of young adult sci-fi, but I decided to try my hand at a romantic comedy. And I'm one of four siblings, so I thought it'd be fun to write a sisterhood story. And I also live in the Pacific Northwest, so I wanted to write something that was very dreamy and drizzly and atmospheric. So I decided to set this book, Drizzle Dreams and Love Struck Things, in the Pacific Northwest, specifically on Orcas Island. So it's about four Indian American sisters whose father owns an inn that's kind of situated on the edge of a beautiful cliff, and they have views everywhere, and all these guests come in and out of the inn, and sometimes they might be good-looking guests. Yeah, at the beginning of the story, the inn has won an award for the most romantic inn in America. And one of the sisters, they all have their own personalities and dreams and passions. And one of the sisters is kind of the very romantic one, and she's looking for like this epic romance. And she's convinced that because they won this award, that it's a sign that, you know, romance is coming their way over the course of the year. And of course, over 4 seasons, romance does come their way. So that's kind of what it's about, and how I got started on it.
Was there a particular thing that made you want to write like YA, like the lighter YA romance? Since it sounds like you've been writing some other genres before.
Well, I think I was inspired by some other writers. Sandhya Menon is like a big inspiration for me. Jenny Han, I'm obsessed with the To All the Boys series, and I've watched the movies like multiple times. So I've always really loved rom-coms, but I was sort of afraid that I wasn't funny. So I think that's part of why I wasn't writing it before. But I decided to just go for it, and I had some encouragement from my agent and other people. So I guess it worked out.
That's awesome. Yeah. How about you, Susan? Was there anything in particular that led you to write this particular book? And I'll let you hold the cover up.
Yes, I will. So it's back off, of course, but it's Jasmine Zumide Needs a Win, which is a fun title. And this book began long ago. It's had a very long gestation period. I kind of wrote the quintessential like coming of age. This is what it was like to sort of grow up at this time novel right after college graduation. I submitted it to St. Martin's Press. This was like 20 plus years ago, mercifully rejected. And then I kept writing, and I actually enrolled at UCLA and got a certificate in screenwriting. And it was like screenwriting, which it's really hard. I did have an agent, but she told me at the time, like, it's going to take a year to get you placed on staff because we've already placed a female. So this was like the early aughts. It was very discouraging, but I kept writing. And then I actually started that as a script. I started this book as a script, but you know, a script is a blueprint for a multi-million-dollar startup business because movies cost millions of dollars to make. And I kept going to meetings and it just wasn't quite getting there. So I decided to make it a book. And whereas it was just more like a cast of characters and friends and very slice of life in the beginning, I decided I wanted to have more like urgency to it. And so it's now about an international incident that kind of crashes into a high school election, namely the Iran hostage crisis of 1979, which sounds kind of out there. But as an Iranian American, you know, I never encountered books with Iranian American main characters as I was growing up. I know Maya can say the same, very few, if any, South Asian characters. So I wanted to write about our story. I did it in a lightly satirical way. So Jasmine runs for president just as this, you know, news explodes across the media, and it just turns Iranians into like the new, you know, bad guys. And so her opponent kind of uses it against her. And it's all about Jasmine and this arc of coming to not only claim her heritage, but be proud of it. Whereas when the book starts, she's really not sure what to think about being Iranian. It's just kind of vaguely embarrassing. You know, her name is weird and the food is weird and the language is weird. So that's kind of the journey of this book. And I think I like to write young adult, and I think adults in general like to write young adult because the relationships are intense. You know, you don't have kids and mortgages and, you know, sort of, oh, I'm worried about like the war in Ukraine. Like it's all very personal and intense. And I just think we keep reliving our high school experiences until we die. So.
Oh, that's funny. I'm going to bounce back to Maya. One of the things that I really enjoyed when I was like prepping and kind of flipping through both books and trying to figure out, oh, what do I want to bring out and talk about? And I loved the juxtaposition of Indian culture with Pacific Northwest sort of landscapes. And I think at the risk of falling into stereotypes, I think of Indian culture in very sunny colors. And that's a simplification. You know, India's a big country and there's lots of different climates, but in general, I think of sunnier, warmer colors. Excuse me. And of course, I live in the Pacific Northwest too, and I'm familiar with the San Juan Islands. And so that's a very different palette. And I just was curious, as you're making choices about what to bring out of each piece of it, like, how did you think about? Excuse me.
Absolutely. That's okay. I'm sorry you're not feeling well, but
I'm better, but my cough is not leaving. I'm gonna let you answer that. I'm gonna go grab a cough drop right behind us. So go ahead and go ahead.
Yeah, so I live in the Pacific Northwest. I've lived here for about a decade, and I kind of considered writing this story as, in a way, like a way to claim this as my home. I know there's lots of other Indian Americans living here, especially in the Redmond area. There's a lot of people in tech. There's probably less though in the islands, but you never know. Someone can move anywhere, and there obviously are people of color in every place that you might go in the United States. But I did like the juxtaposition too of, what you think of about Indian Americans and having them in this setting. So I have this sentence in one of the chapters where Nidhi is one of the other sister, and she's kind of been thinking that she wants to get back in touch with her heritage because these sisters have been pretty isolated from the diaspora. They don't really have a lot of other Indian Americans that they get to see. They basically just get a lot of the culture from their dad. But so there's a sentence in there about how she wants to reconnect, but it says something like she's, a brown girl with too much rain gear and too many recipes for croissants or something like that. So it's kind of evoke that feeling of separation that she feels from her culture.
Yeah. No, and
I'm going to say, if I could interject, I love Maya's book, and it's so cozy. I love the setting. You bring up a really good point, Christy, about how it's a little maybe different from, an expectation, but like, Maya's publisher is Disney Publishing, and I'm like, they need to open this in as an adult theme park, because you're gonna want to read the book. 100%. You're gonna I want to stay there.
Exactly. Well, and I was writing that question down going, okay, I need to word this carefully because, it does draw upon some stereotypical, Indian American motifs and Indian cultural things, but it was really something I enjoyed about the book. And it's one thing that I enjoy about the best part of American culture, in my opinion, of all these people coming together to make a culture that are bringing all these pieces from everywhere, and that there isn't a stereotypical, like, one kind of American. And but I do love the reading books where people belong in a place, but they also bring a part of themselves from other cultures, and so it all gets sort of mixed together in all the different colors. But I did love that juxtaposition of all the Indian food and the spices and all these warm things, and then the Pacific Northwest and all the grays and browns and blues. And I just thought that was a fun undertone of the book and the title, honestly.
Thank you.
So, and Susan, I'm curious for you, because you're not just straddling cultural divides in your book, you're also going back to a different time period, which brings its own challenges. And I'm curious how you sort of prepared or researched or whatever to try to make it true to the time period.
I think the reason why I set it in 1979 with the Iran hostage crisis, I feel like the reason to write historical fiction is because you're looking for the present day resonance. So I was looking for, 9/11, of course, engendered incredible media hostility towards Muslims and a general hysteria. We've had other, different groups, LGBTQIA plus people, Latinx people, Chinese Americans, like in the wake of COVID, it's like different kind of groups sort of get their turn in the barrel. And so I wanted an event, a media event that was specific to Iranians, and the hostage crisis, which quickly, in a nutshell, there was a revolution in Iran in 1978, and the king, or the Shah, was overthrown, and the religious leader, the highest religious leader, took control of the country. And that's what the uprising is about today. If you see videos on TikTok or Twitter of everybody demonstrating, it's to get rid of this, 40 something years of Islamic rule. So that incident was like, well, it's unique to Iranian Americans. At the same time, it evokes, I think, a present day resonance to other groups that have been subjected to this media hysteria, because that's what happens. It's just like I said, suddenly Iran, by extension, Iranians are the bad guys. So I talked to my dad a lot, and Jasmine's older than I am, but not that much older. So there are certain things I definitely remember the before and after of before all of these world events started swirling. It was like, ooh, what kind of name is that? Because I have a very exotic maiden name. I would say Iranian. Ooh, how interesting. And then after all of this began, what kind of name is that? Iranian. And then I would just be looked at with suspicion and distrust. And so honestly, Iranian people just started saying Persian, which are sort of synonymous, but not exactly. And we've been, quite honestly, we've been the bad guys ever since. In my life, really in my lifetime, there hasn't been a time when it's like, yeah, go Iranian people, except for now that they're rising up and the women are taking control. Everyone's like on our side again.
Yeah, it's a very odd sort of cycle of who do we want to be mad at this week? Which is
well, and the kind of the point of the book is that sadly, because of interference by the United States for the oil, because Iran was an oil-rich country, the United States meddled a little bit, and things could have unfolded in a different way, but unfortunately they didn't. And I wanted people to know that story too, because again, there just gets to be this narrative of like, they're bad people, Iran is bad, Iranians are bad. And it's like, no. It's much more complicated and nuanced than that. But the book explains it in a funny way, I hope.
I love how much history you pack into that. I mean, it's a story, and you're not like interrupting the story to give everybody a history lesson, but it's all woven in there. And my kids don't know. I mean, they're aware of it because we've talked about it, but they don't really, they didn't live through that time. And so I think it's really great. I mean, that's why I get all gushy about pretty much any book is, being exposed to a different cultural background that maybe you haven't been exposed to, or a different historical time period that you didn't know. And that gives you a little bit more nuance about, well, why things are the way they are. I just think we need much more of that. So,
One of the things that's been really gratifying is that readers on Goodreads, reviews on Goodreads of people who are Jasmine's age, there have been several kind of like adult readers who've said, oh, I lived through this.
mhm.
And they're like, I had no idea of sort of like this side of the story, you know? So that's gratifying to me, is that even people that lived through it had
Yeah,
a completely
yeah,
different
that's
kind of-
great.
which is always the case. It's always the case.
Yeah. I was a little bit too young to really remember it, but I was around, but I wasn't really paying attention to the news.
Exactly.
So Susan, you asked this question a little bit earlier about why YA, but I'm curious, Maya, for you, what draws you to the YA age group in particular, as opposed to say adults or middle grade or younger kids?
Well, I think I've always been drawn to stories about identity and figuring out who you are. And this is just a time in your life where that is, coming to a crux. You really have to decide who you're going to be, what kind of person you're going to be. It's not just about your career, but I think you make a lot of decisions about what kind of person you want to be, and you think about how you fit into the world. And that's always a struggle. And I think that's why there's so many mental health issues at that age too, is because it is a struggle to find your place in the world, and you're looking for those role models. So part of the reason is, I hope to provide like something uplifting to give teenagers a chance to see like you're worthy of love. You can have your happy ending. That's kind of like my goal with this.
That's very cool. I'm looking all over. So the next one I wrote down is also for Maya. So what is one piece or one aspect of Indian American culture that you really hope shines through the book, that you really want people to kind of take away from the heritage that you included in the book?
Well, there's a couple things. Just that, obviously, Indian Americans aren't what you think they are. Some of them are very assimilated. Some of them are different. There's queer Indians. There are intersectional Indians who, have other marginalizations. I really liked. It was important to me to include the part where Dad kind of tells Nidhi that you'll always be an Indian, and you don't have to wear a sari, and you don't have to cook Indian food or Indian. It's just a part of who you are. And that was, I think when I was growing up, I never had the term Indian American, and it was always like, are you an Indian or are you an American? And like I never even heard of like the idea of an Indian. So that was just something that I wished I would have heard growing up. So I wanted Dad to give that advice to Nidhi.
Yeah. Susan, you kind of answered this already, but I'm going to ask it again just so that there's a more direct answer of what is an insight that you hope readers take away that's in relation to, Iranians and Iranian Americans and the nuances of that whole situation, as opposed to just making assumptions based on what we see in the news or whatever.
Yeah, I agree with Maya that, like the South Asian diaspora, it's the same thing with Iranians. And I think Jasmine in the book, her mother's white, her father's an Iranian immigrant. That was my experience. My mother was white, my father was Iranian immigrant. So I felt very pulled between the two cultures and not kind of, Persian enough. And so I agree with Maya. I hope that, people reading, and maybe especially Iranian American teens, will be kind of affirmed and seen. And I think the biggest thing, of course, because that's the whole point of the book, is that there is a very negative perception of Iran and Iranians. And I was trying to dispel that, with the countervailing narrative of like, here's this other side of the story that you may not have heard. And I hope I've portrayed like Jasmine's Ame Mina, which is her auntie Mina, is staying with her and her brother while their dad is traveling. And she's kind of the personification of like Persian womanhood. She's just generous and loving and cooking everything under the sun. for
making it right. I'm like, oh, I want
exactly. That's how
food in
that's
both of the books. I was just like, oh man,
yeah.
now I'm
And
hungry.
family is close. And the same thing in Maya's book. You know, the sisters are so beautifully close. And I think there is something about, there does seem to be something about foreign cultures, you know, where family and family closeness is a real priority. And so I wanted that to come through, and you know, again, just Jasmine's ultimate pride in her heritage was important to me to convey. Because that was my arc. You know, I was, like I said, vaguely embarrassed to be Iranian. And then by the time I was in my early 20s, wait a minute, this culture is amazing. It helped that, well, it didn't help, but I mean, my parents got divorced somewhat predictably, and then he remarried an Iranian woman. So we were much more immersed in the Persian culture, and it just made me really appreciate it. And now, you know, I celebrate Persian New Year. We love Persian food. I used to do little classes at my son's school for Persian New Year. I'd bring in food just so that if Iranians were still kind of the bad guys in the media, I was hoping they would stop and kind of remember. They used to call me, like, you know, Mrs. Alex's mom, like, Mrs. Alex's mom brought us like treats and she was really nice, and, you know, she was Iranian, so maybe they're not so bad.
Well, honestly, I still hold out hope that someday this situation over there stabilizes, because there's such an incredible culture.
Oh my gosh, 5,000-6,000
so many, so many amazing people groups and so much amazing history that it would be so amazing to be able to visit in a in a more stable environment. But so I still hoping that maybe someday.
Me too. Believe me, that's like first on my bucket list. I want to go with my, you know, with my parents.
It is just because it is such an amazing place, and it's just been closed off for most people for such a long time.
Yes.
Especially people who are from there, you know, and not being able to go back and experience that. So I am curious too. I thought of this question at the very end, and I was like, oh, this could be interesting or not. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. But I think it's really interesting that a lot of times when groups of people come from, and one example I can think of is that my husband's family is largely from Scandinavia, the ethnic background, and Scandinavians, they come to this country and it's almost like, well, not almost like, a sort of subculture forms around that American, you know, Scandinavian American communities, you know, slang develops ways of celebrating, and that become unrecognizable to the people back in the home countries. So one of the things that a lot of Scandinavians, they say oofta, and when I went to college, I met people who were actually from Scandinavia, and they had no idea what that was all about. And I'm curious if that has also happened in some of the, like Indian American culture, Iranian American culture, where because you are sort of trying to have a distilled experience of what maybe was left behind, are there quirks or fun things that have sort of grown up around that are maybe unique to that culture in America versus that culture back home?
You want to take it, Maya?
I'm trying to think. Like, obviously, when you're an Indian American or a diaspora kid of any kind, I think you are in your own culture. Like, you didn't grow up in your homeland, so everything about your identity is actually really different. And so, like, personally, I wouldn't even really feel comfortable writing a character who grew up in India as a main point of view character, because I think that perspective is way too different from my perspective, and I wouldn't really be able to give justice to it. So I can really only write from the Indian American perspective, because that's just what I've always known, is being in between these two cultures. But so I actually have a follow-up coming out called Wild Wishes and Kisses. So there will be more about these four sisters. in this one, Nidhi, I keep talking about Nidhi because she's the one that's really interested in getting back in touch with her heritage. And in the second book, she goes back to India as part of a like study abroad program that she's managed to line up, mainly just because she really wanted to go. And for the first time, she'll actually get to, you know, eat the street food there and hear all these languages around her and be in like these crowded cities where she's grown up in Orcas Island, and which is like so like quiet.
Quiet,
They're just, you know, it's just like deer crossing the roads and farmland. And so now she'll be in this like completely different space, and you know, she'll notice all the differences, but she'll also notice like, you know, how everyone is kind of the same, like they all have their own goals and their passions, and she'll discover a new passion while she's there. So I don't want to give too much away.
I would say that for the first generation immigrants, like my father's a first generation, he's an immigrant, my stepmother's an immigrant, you know, they are a little more like insular. For Iran, like right off the bat, if they sort of came here, most likely they maybe are not devout Muslims. So like when my grandparents used to visit, I mean, they're praying 5 times a day. They're bringing their prayer rugs. So religion is not as much of a centerpiece. Islam is not as much of like a centerpiece of life as it certainly is in Iran. I think, you know, the language starts to get a little more diffuse because, you know, we don't speak it. My dad didn't teach us Farsi. My stepbrother and cousins speak Farsi, but they're not teaching their children the language, even though I teach your kids Farsi because it's my biggest regret that I don't speak it. And then, you know, the food gets a little bit bastardized. Like there's now a place like Westwood there's a huge Persian community, and there's oh my gosh, it's skipping my mind. I can't remember if it's a little Tehran, but there's like a whole, it's sort of near UCLA, you know, there's Persian pizza shops, and you know, there's kind of Americanized Persian food. So yeah, everything gets a little bit Americanized and the culture gets a little bit more diffused and a little bit more diffused. But I think certainly like my dad, in contrast to his friends who were also immigrants, but who all married Persian women, they were much more insular and, you know, really sort of exclusively eating and cooking Persian food, and everybody in the family spoke Farsi and celebrating all the Persian holidays. And we didn't really do that. My dad was more trying to assimilate, and then my mother was American. And, you know, now the pendulum is kind of swung, and he too is just so happy to be kind of immersed like a little bit more fully in his culture.
Yeah, I think that's what's really interesting is that, you know, there becomes, you know, you mentioned the Persian pizza place, which I love because that's what's so, I think that's one thing that's uniquely American is all these different cultures coming over, and then the food sort of evolving, you know, to fit different tastes or different, you know, different ingredient availability. I think, you know, I think about people talking about authenticity, and it's like, you know, it's not any less authentic. It's just coming from a Persian American culture rather than, you know, and, you know, same thing happened with Chinese food or whatever. It's not that it's not Chinese food, except that it's now Chinese American food instead of, you know, so it's fun to see those influences and those evolutions. So what was your favorite scenes to write? Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, in the book, I have Dad makes this lavender gulab jamun, which is definitely a mix because it's traditionally, gulab jamun is a dessert that's like a syrup, kind of like a syrupy donut type thing, and it's usually made with like rose flavor.
Oh yeah,
and rose water, and so just them having this lavender gulab jamun, I just imagine that. Like, well, I've tried to make it before, and it's hard to find rose water in an American grocery.
Yeah.
So I was just sort of imagining that Dad would like use this other, you know, flavor that is much more common out in the islands. There's a lot of lavender fields, and how that came to be.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was, particularly before the advent of the internet and all these international grocery places that you can get food. I mean, a lot of times it was just, well, I can't get this ingredient, what feels like it's the closest thing, or sort of in the same spirit of whatever it was that people were making. So
Right.
do you have a favorite scene that you just really especially enjoyed writing, or you especially are excited about how it came out?
I loved writing the scene where Nivy goes on this sort of, I don't want to say who it's with, but on this midnight adventure. She's, um, well, basically, she had discovered the identity of the skull, who is sort of the street artist, and but it's very innocuous because he only does it with chalk. So don't think he's a vandal or anything. So she goes on this overnight adventure to do this, and she's always been a rule follower and never snuck out or anything. So this was her first time having a real kind of adventure, and I had a lot of fun with that scene.
That's cool.
My one of my favorite scenes to write, like I said, it's a lightly satirical tone, which I think maybe Jasmine is perceived, at least from the sort of the Goodreads reviews that I've read, she's kind of a disaster MC. I've had several people say, oh, this book reminds me of the show Never Have I Ever, because I guess that lead character on the Netflix series is just constantly kind of making the wrong decision for what she thinks are the right reasons.
Yeah.
So Jasmine goes into this election just thinking, it's a cinch. My opponent is a dork. No one is going to vote for him. His campaign is reinstate the dress code. Again, it's meant to be kind of lightly satirical. And then during the campaign kickoff, which is, just not going to be a big deal. It's kind of like she considers herself a shoo-in. This whole big drama erupts because her brother is a very outspoken defender of Iran. And all of a sudden, this big brouhaha erupts, and, she doesn't know what to do, but she kind of figures it out at the last minute. So it's very kind of dramatic and hopefully funny. And just, it's the scene that really sets the events of the rest of the book in motion.
Yeah.
It was an important scene to get right. Yeah. And it was fun. It was quite fun to write.
Yeah, that's cool. Sometimes the harder ones, when you finally are happy with them, are the ones that you're like, yes, yay. So you mentioned, Maya, that you have another follow-on book in this. Is this going to be a series or a duology?
Yeah, it's a duology. So there's another book coming out in October about the four sisters and kind of the next stage of the relationship. So in this book, it's all kind of first kisses and relationships, but I wanted to explore where those relationships go. And sadly, some of them won't last, but it's all very hopeful anyway. But I thought it was a good thing to see, have teenagers see that one relationship isn't everything. So there's kind of a discussion about, moving on also from certain relationships that maybe don't work out, but it's okay.
And you've got other books too that are coming out in the spring. I can't remember. I know I looked it up a little earlier and I don't remember.
Kids chapter book series coming out. The first one is called Sadal Sinha Battles Superstorms, and it's kind of a science adventure, kind of like Magic School Bus.
Oh, fun.
They take their cardboard box and get into adventures that revolve around something science-y. In the first book, they learn about the science of hurricanes. It's Diwali, and their house is under hurricane watch, and they're worried they might have to evacuate, and they might, they wouldn't be able to celebrate their holiday. So they go into the hurricane to see if they can learn about the science of hurricanes and maybe stop it.
Oh, very cool. And how many books is that? And a series that hopefully will go on for a little while?
So right now I have 3 books contracted, and we'll see if they do well.
Oh, very cool. That's awesome. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
So Susan, what do you have coming up next?
So my next book is a little bit of a gear shift for me. It's not a sequel to Jasmine Zumade. It's contemporary. Jasmine Zumade, people keep misidentifying and saying it's contemporary, which I'm fine with, even though it's not contemporary.
Well, it has that feel, even though it's set in the past.
Yeah,
So,
in the past.
yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So my next young adult book is called The Search for Us. I don't have arcs or anything yet, but it is loosely based on my husband's experience. He grew up not knowing his biological father, and then I got him a DNA test just to see if he had inherited any health risks from him. And he hadn't, but he found out he had a sister that he had never known about, a half sister he'd never known about. And they got connected. And I was just fascinated by this like instant sibling connection. Together, they searched for their father, who had just seemingly disappeared. No one knew what had happened to him. He had passed away before they could find him, but it just made me think, what if these characters met in the present day, got DNA matched in as teenagers today, and began to search for their father? And then to make it kind of grounded in my own emotional truth, I made their father not only an Iranian immigrant, but also a US Army veteran. And it's all the feels. You're gonna laugh. I'm so proud of it. I'm really, really excited about it. It comes out October 24th, 2023. Yeah, it's on Goodreads. It's on Goodreads again. It's called The Search for Us. And I love it. I think it's a great story. I'm excited for people to read it. Yeah, and because they're being kind of similar to Jasmine. They have white mothers and their father's an Iranian immigrant. They're being raised by their white families. So their kind of journey of discovery is not only for their father, but also for this sort of missing piece of their identity. So.
Well, that's great. That sounds very cool. What's the, Maya, I didn't ask you, you said the next Drizzle Dreams title and I didn't catch it.
It's Wild Wishes and Windswept Kisses.
Yay.
The cover's gorgeous. It's just gorgeous. I've seen it.
Oh, I love
beautiful.
Is it a kind of in like matching in some way with the current cover?
It's the same artist. She's a South Asian artist that did the first one, and she does the second one. But the second one has the four sisters kind of together, and they're looking at a sunset, and it's very autumny.
Oh, pretty.
One day, yeah. So it's like an autumn themed.
That's awesome. I do love the cover on the first one too. And tell me again what the name of the middle grade, the chapter book.
Oh, Sejal Sinha Battles Superstorms. You need the spelling.
Yeah.
Another great cover.
Yeah, that one's fun. I need to look these up so we could get them in.
Thank you, Christy, and thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
You're welcome. I'm so glad this worked out. It just was fun. It was fun when I was working on coming up questions because of the similarities of the books, even though they're, a completely different culture, both of them. There's some sort of the coming of age and the cultural owning your own self and your own culture and where you come from and stuff are kind of in both of them, and I really loved that. So
absolutely, that's why I love Jasmine.
I'm very happy that you suggested that, Maya. That was a very fun idea, so thank you. All right, well, I really appreciate you both coming on, and I'm excited about the next books coming out. I'll probably be bothering you again next fall and seeing if we could do this again maybe and talk about the new books. So
absolutely,
have a really good night, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good night.